Okay, so usually when we talk about barbarian invasions and the collapse of the Roman Empire, we actually wind up talking about people like Attila the Hun, there's a couple of Theodorics in there with two different groups of gods, and focusing on how the barbarians destroyed the Roman Empire in Spain, Italy, Gaul, a little bit of Greece, that sort of thing. And the Vandals are kind of pushed off to the side of almost, in a lot of books, they're actually almost kind of a footnote, which is, I think, is wrong, and that's part of what I'm arguing for here. The reason that this happened, I think, is because, well, for two reasons. First of all, because of Eurocentrism in European scholarship in the late 19th century, they were very interested in the creation of their own nations, like the creation of France, the creation of Spain, Germany, sort of Italy, and so on. So they were interested in researching Franks, Goths, Lombards, whoever else. And the second reason is that all of these people, especially the Lombards and the Franks and the Goths, left us historians who wrote about them from their own perspective. The Vandals, on the other hand, did not have anyone to do that for them. There is no literature, almost no literature at all from the Vandal kingdom. And the Vandal kingdom did not develop into any kind of European state. It only lasted 100 years before it was conquered by the Byzantines. Then another 100 years later, it was conquered by the Arabs, and so they were forgotten. But I think that they were, in fact, the single most important factor in the collapse of the Roman Empire when we consider that the Roman Empire was not a European state, but a Mediterranean state. And we look at it, late antiquity from a Mediterranean perspective, all of a sudden the Vandals, and especially their king Geiseric, becomes extremely important. So this is the only contemporary image of Geiseric that we have. Who knows if it's even accurate. Towards the later part of his reign in the 450s and 460s AD, the Vandals started minting their own silver coins like this because the Roman supply was starting to dry up. So my paper focuses on Geiseric in particular and his part in the fall of the Roman Empire. This remarkable individual brought a small group of Vandals, as well as Alans and a few others, across the sea from southern Spain into Africa, and then turned them from a relatively insignificant group into the single most important threat to the Roman Empire. He ruled for 49 years, longer than any Roman emperor ever did up to that time, and his rule coincided almost perfectly with the last decades of the Western Empire, from the reign of Valentinian III, beginning in 425, to the deposition of Romulus Augustus in 476. In fact, from his actions, it looks like Geiseric was actually attempting to create a third power in the Mediterranean centered on Carthage, which he may have hoped would be the equal of the two Roman states centered in Rome and Constantinople. Now, outside of the small but now flourishing field of specialists who study the Vandals and the kingdom of Africa, Geiseric's role in the collapse of the Western Empire is underappreciated. This is in part due to his longevity. Like I said, he reigned almost 50 years. But he played a huge role also in that he was the first non-Roman to set up a new and independent state, in this case in Africa, carved out of the Roman Empire. So this paper will show how his career progressed. His kingship can be divided into three phases. The first phase, when he became king, to the conquest of Africa and Carthage. The second was a short period of peace and cooperation with the Roman Empire from 444 to 455. And the third was his unrelenting hostility towards the Roman Empire from 455 until his death in 477. When Geiseric became king in 428, he felt himself the leader of a small group of Vandals who had just recently become prominent. This group was made up of Sicilian and Hasdin Vandals, as well as a certain number of Alans. They had been forced into the province of Baetica in southern Spain, following their defeat by the Roman general Stewart. They had been around here, then the Romans campaigned against them and forced them down there. Had Asturias actually followed up his victory and defeated the Vandals a second time, it's not likely they would have crossed into Africa at all. And now they instead of occupying Galicia and Lusitania, they were in Baetica, which was an extremely rich province and actually extremely important to the Roman state. Under Geiseric, the Vandal king at the time, they took control of a large Mediterranean fleet, which was centered on the coast of the Atlantic and Mediterranean, and they raided various places, including the Balearic Islands and Mauritania down here. Geiseric died in Seville, which is in Latin is Hispalis, which is right here, in 428, and his son Geiseric succeeded him, and then within a year, he moved his entire people across the sea into Africa. North Africa was extremely important to the well-being of the empire, at least in the west. It was from here that most of the foodstuffs for the city of Rome itself were supplied from the time of the late Republic until the Vandal conquest. By the end of Aurelian's reign in 275, the public dole in Rome had increased compared to that of earlier times. It included not only grain, but also oil, pork, and wine. Much of this grain originally came from Egypt, but after the foundation of Constantinople, Egyptian produce was diverted to the new capital, and Rome was supplied largely from Africa. Upwards of 500,000 tons of grain were exported from Africa every year, and in the late 4th century, about 85% of the pottery found at Rome's port in Ostia was African in origin. The loss of Africa then was not just a loss of a province, but it was also a huge economic disaster. Militarily, it opened up a new theater, and thus the loss was twofold. Until 429, the Vandals had been a relatively minor threat, but the move into Africa turned them into an immediate danger to the empire. But why they actually crossed from Baetica into Africa is rather vague. They had a secure hold on the rich lands of southern Spain, and did not come under direct attack from any group after the failed expedition of Castinus in 422. Indeed, there was no threat to them from anywhere. The Visigoths were mostly confined to Gaul at this time, and the Romans had no army to speak of, although their administration did continue in some parts of Spain, especially on the eastern coast here and in most of the province of Tarraconensis. In addition, the Vandals' numbers were increased by the incorporation of other groups on the Iberian Peninsula, including, as I said, some Alans, and there's as well as Romans and Goths. It is unlikely that the Vandals, as Procopius claims, were invited into Africa by Boniface, the Roman commander there. Procopius says that the general invited them to join his army out of fear of Aetius and the Western court out of some palace intrigues. This is unlikely to be true, as by 429, when the Vandals entered Africa, Boniface had already been reconciled with the imperial court of Valentinian III, Placidia, and Aetius. Additionally, in Procopius' narrative, this episode contrasts with a similar one later on, where Justinian hears rumors that his general Belisarius is going to betray him. Belisarius does the honorable thing and returns to Constantinople. If the contrast between Boniface and Belisarius is intentional, it is possible that Procopius invented it in the case of Boniface in order to show the goodness of his hero, Belisarius. They may also suggest that the Vandals saw Africa as a place of refuge. It certainly made an inviting target, since it was lightly defended, but the question of what the Vandals would need refuge from cannot be answered, given that they had secured territory in Baetica after they defeated Castinus' expedition, and there was little prospect of further danger in the near future. In the absence of an obvious reason, we can only speculate at Geiseric's motives. The most likely reason to migrate was probably out of a desire to increase his own power, and it is very likely that he had heard of Carthage's wealth as well as its vulnerability. Later, he became a shrewd and effective politician, and at some point he wanted to create a third power in Mediterranean to compete with Rome and Constantinople. This desire may have only manifested itself after the Vandals were in Africa. Secondly, the idea of an African invasion by a barbarian group from Spain was not a new thing. The Goths, some Goths under Wallia, attempted to cross into Africa, but were actually forced to abandon the project some years earlier. A logistical issue with the Vandal crossing is the strength of the Vandals themselves. The figure of 80,000, including civilians, is often quoted in ancient and modern sources, with some accepting it and others doubting it. If we accept it as true, that the Vandals probably had between 15,000 and 20,000 fighting men, which would have been a very substantial single fighting force for the time. If we take the figure as accurate, we run into the problem of just how the Vandals managed to get across the sea to Africa. The invasion is often presented as a large fleet carrying 80,000 people all at once across the sea, with the Vandals seizing the many ships to which they had access in southern Spain. While the notion of a great flotilla crossing the Straits of Gibraltar to conquer a new land is a romantic one, it is probably untrue, considering that Basiliscus' naval campaign against the Vandals in 468 supposedly included 100,000 men and 1,000 ships, and that this was particularly stressful on the combined resources of both halves of the empire. It is unlikely that the Vandals could move 80,000 people all at once with only the resources of southern Spain. More likely, the operation was conducted in stages. Regardless of their numbers or how they came into Africa, the strength of the Romans there was minimal, and the Vandals moved eastward to Carthage without meeting much resistance. Furthermore, the Straits of Gibraltar should be seen more as a highway than as a barrier during antiquity. Indeed, it has been credibly suggested that Tingitania, this part of Africa down here, was included in the Spanish diocese by Diocletian precisely because he wanted to give this African frontier a hinterland from which the military could be supplied, as was often the case in the organization of the dioceses. Additionally, Tingitania had stronger cultural and economic connections with Baetica than with other parts of Africa. The nature of the geography, especially the Rif, which is a mountain range, tends to isolate the area, roughly modern Morocco, from the Mediterranean coastline to the east. Given the close connections between Baetica and Tingitania, it should not be surprising that eventually the Vandals turned to Africa for their next military venture, even if they did not control Tingitania itself. Since Tingitania was not part of the Diocese of Africa, it is not altogether surprising that Boniface made no move to stop them until they reached Numidia. There was now a battle in which Boniface was defeated and forced to retreat to Hippo. The Vandals besieged Hippo, gave up after 14 months, ravaged the countryside, and once again defeated Boniface, although he had been reinforced. Ultimately, they were given possession of Hippo and the surrounding areas in the Treaty of 435. Not on this map, but Hippo is just over there on the, just outside the map. Now Geiseric was a direct threat to the Roman Empire. Although he did not yet possess Carthage, controlling Numidia just west of Africa Proconsularis put him in a position of great power. In 439, he abrogated the Treaty of 435 and launched a surprise attack on Carthage, which he took almost immediately. So ended the first phase of Geiseric's role at the end of the Roman Empire. Had he simply conquered Africa and not done anything else, his place in history would still have been a remarkable chapter in the collapse of the empire. After he conquered Carthage, the rest was never able to regain Africa and its valuable resources. Had the empire managed to hang on to these provinces, it would not have had to divert resources to create new fortifications in Italy or to expensive naval campaigns, which ultimately failed to retake the province anyway. Almost immediately, in 440, Geiseric used Carthage's maritime resources to raid Sicily, putting another rich province at risk. He also began to build a new state in Africa by distributing the wealth of Africa Proconsularis and Zugitana, which is also not on this map, but it's not named. It's a problem. Africa Proconsularis is this area here, and Zugitana is sort of a crescent around it, like that. This included land and valuables confiscated from Romano-Africans and the Italian aristocracy, who were mostly absentee landlords residing in Italy. The threat to Rome was now acute, and Valentinian negotiated a new treaty with Geiseric in 442, and that's what the map shows here. The Treaty of 442 gave the Vandals all of this territory for them to govern themselves. They were confirmed in their position of Africa, while Numidia was returned to Rome. Tingitania went unmentioned, and it is unlikely that Roman jurisdiction there was contested. Additionally, according to the treaty, Geiseric's son Huneric was betrothed to Eudokia, the daughter of Valentinian III, and consequently became a hostage at Ravenna. The second point is significant, for it suggests that Geiseric did not necessarily want to destroy the Roman Empire. He may not have had a clear goal, but forming a dynastic link with the ruling house could have aided him politically in the future. After the treaty was signed, there was a period of relative peace between the Vandals and Romans. Grain shipments even resumed from Africa to Rome as stipulated in the treaty. These seem to have been done for free rather than for profit, as there is an almost complete lack of Roman coinage from this period in Carthage. Indeed, trade between Carthage and Rome actually declined greatly, at least in part because of a new sales tax in Italy, since Valentinian desperately needed to raise cash there. Nevertheless, trade with Middle Africa did not end, but rather it became more dispersed throughout the Western Mediterranean. This period of peace came to an end in 455 after the murder of Valentinian III. His successor canceled Heinrich's betrothal to Eudokia, and from this time on, Geiseric was an unwavering enemy of the Roman Empire. His hopes to make himself a legitimate player in Roman politics had been dashed, and he did not hesitate to take action. Within a few months, he seized Rome, sacked the city, and took the imperial women, including Eudokia, back to Carthage. The sack of the city was no doubt a traumatic event for Rome, just as that of Alaric had been in 410. Thus began over 20 years of intermittent warfare against the Roman Empire, which could not afford to fight off the Vandals in addition to many other peoples, such as the Visigoths and Franks, and some Huns further north, who were causing more trouble there. Using their fleet, the Vandals raided far and wide. They achieved control of Sicily and Sardinia, though they never managed to solidify their hold over these islands. There were two attempts to retake North Africa in the 460s, one by the Emperor Majorian of the west and the other by Leo III of the east. That both empires were willing to expend huge resources in a time of deprivation demonstrates the importance of Africa and the danger Geiseric and his people posed to the Roman state. The first attempt at reconquest, that of Majorian in 461, ended before it began. The emperor had planned to invade Africa by the same route the Vandals had used, but Geiseric, aware of his plans, foiled them by disrupting Roman supply shipping. The army never made it out of Spain, and Majorian's failure cost him his life. The second attempt was actually very close to success. In 468, Leo I assembled a huge fleet and army with which to retake Africa. It might have been successful had the commander, Basiliscus, not dithered and allowed Geiseric time to make an attack of his own. When the wind changed direction, he sent fire ships at the Roman fleet, destroying most of their ships and scattering the rest. Two ruinously expensive endeavors ended in failure for the Romans and secured the position of Geiseric and the Vandals in Africa for decades. The Romans did manage to recapture Sicily and Sardinia, but they were quickly lost again as the west became too weak to take any action and the east did nothing. Geiseric continued much as he had before, raiding Mediterranean islands and coastlines, until finally in 476 he established a perpetual peace with the Emperor Zeno in the east. He died the following year. Geiseric's relationship with the Roman Empire was mercurial. He was usually an enemy, sometimes cooperative, but he always played a key role in the collapse of the Roman Empire. First, he took Africa, a rich province that had been useful to the west and fighting back against other barbarian groups. A short period of relative peace intervened, but Geiseric insisted that the kingdom be treated as an equal state rather than as a group of federated barbarians. From his base in Africa, he was able to gain control of the Western Mediterranean and disrupt Roman trade, which also forced Rome to divert more resources to the Mediterranean. This weakened the empire to the point where it was moribund and made it easier for other barbarians to deal the remaining death blows to Rome. His sack of Rome was an important event, but not quite as significant as in the big picture as his general destruction of Roman economy and political structure. The last thing I want to talk about is this painting from the early 19th century, which is supposed to show the Vandals' sack of Rome, but it's very, well, it's a romantic painting. It doesn't look, the Vandals don't even look like how they should. It's not that good on this screen, is it? But these African people here, and this guy here with the head covering, those are supposed to be Vandals. This must be Africans, even though the Vandals were Germans. That's King Geiseric over there, looking actually very German. And there are the two imperial women being seized by this guy and to be carried away. And also of interest, they sacked Rome and took its valuables. There's the menorah from the Second Temple of Jerusalem, which the Vandals certainly took, and we don't know where exactly what happened to it after the Byzantines conquered Carthage, but they took it back to the east and it's been lost since then. But this is often how the Vandals have been seen over the last 200 years or so, as barbarians who march in, destroy things, and who are more or less a footnote, and who are most remembered for the sack of Rome and for giving their name to the word vandalism. That's all I have to say. say.